This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one country, one leader, or one decision. This is about something quieter and far more permanent. What you are watching right now looks like restraint. It looks like diplomacy. It looks like de-escalation. It is none of those things because power did not step back. Power changed shape. What used to arrive with uniforms and warnings now arrives with contracts. With infrastructure plans, with promises that sound cooperative and conditions that are never spoken out loud. And the dangerous part is not that this is happening. The dangerous part is how normal it already feels. If you want to understand what is being tested here, stay with me. Because once this model works once, it doesn't stay in one place. And the moment you recognize it, you realize something uncomfortable. This system does not need your consent to function, but it does need your attention. And we are already late. What actually controls the system now is not force, not ideology, not even diplomacy. It is dependency. Control no longer comes from what a country does. It comes from what it cannot afford to lose. Revenue streams, energy flows, infrastructure that must keep running, or everything else collapses. This is why personalities no longer matter the way we think they do. Leaders rotate, governments change, the system stays. When access to capital is conditional, compliance becomes structural. When infrastructure is shared, sovereignty becomes negotiable. When survival depends on cooperation, resistance becomes expensive. And this is the reframing that matters. This is not partnership as trust. This is partnership as leverage. It rewards alignment quietly. It punishes deviation automatically. No speech is required. What looks like stability is often just pressure applied evenly enough to feel invisible. And once a system learns how to regulate behavior without confrontation, the next step is obvious. It scales. There was a time when control announced itself. You could see it. You could name it. You could protest it. Before, pressure arrived all at once. Sanctions, embargos, ultimatums. Everyone noticed. Everyone reacted. Now it arrives gradually as incentives, as access, as help. Before, resistance looked heroic. Now it looks irrational because the shift wasn't dramatic. It was administrative. Licenses replaced threats. Investment replaced occupation. Maintenance schedules replaced troop movements. And over time, the question changed. Not do we agree, but can we afford not to? This is why the most dangerous transformations don't feel violent. They feel procedural. They feel technical. They feel boring. And boredom is the greatest shield power has ever invented. Because while attention drifts, dependencies lock in. Pipelines age. Systems integrate. Exit costs rise. By the time anyone notices the change, the option to reverse it is already gone. And that's when the first real shock appears. Then comes the moment that feels like a breakthrough. A pause, a reversal. A decision that looks on the surface like restraint. An action is not taken, pressure is eased. Signals are exchanged, and it is framed as progress. But watch what actually changes and what doesn't. The structure remains intact. The leverage stays in place. The dependencies are not removed. They are reinforced. What looks like relief is really recalibration because the system doesn't need constant pressure to work. It needs credibility. It needs the knowledge shared quietly that the switch still exists. This is how shocks operate in modern systems, not as explosions, as reminders. They tell everyone watching, this can tighten again at any moment. If you're trying to understand why this moment matters, don't focus on the gesture. Focus on what it proves. It proves the mechanism works. And once a mechanism proves itself, it doesn't get retired. It gets refined. Here is what actually makes this system durable. It doesn't rely on obedience. It relies on alignment. The people who benefit most are not governments. They are structures that sit above governments. Capital flows in, technology follows, infrastructure becomes inseparable from outside expertise. And once that happens, damage is no longer external. It is internalized. If the system tightens, revenue falls first. Budgets shrink, social pressure rise. Not because anyone ordered it, because the math did. This is why resistance is redirected inward. Leaders don't face foreign armies. They face domestic instability, and that is the quiet genius of the mechanism. Responsibility becomes diffuse. Pain looks self-inflicted. Blame loses its target. Those who design the system absorb profit and insulation. Those inside the system absorb volatility and risk. It's not punishment, it's exposure. And exposure scales far more efficiently than force. Once you see this clearly, another question emerges. Not about who controls the system, but about how many others are already inside it. Then the pressure increases. Quietly at first, almost politely, access narrows. Timelines shift. Conditions multiply. No announcement, no confrontation, just friction. Projects slow. Cash hesitates. Confidence thins. Inside the system, everything still looks cooperative. On paper, nothing is wrong, but outcomes start to change. Revenue misses targets. Maintenance gets deferred. Social tension rises without a clear cause. And here's the key detail. No one has to pull the lever. The system does it on its own. Because once survival is tied to flow, any disruption becomes discipline. At this stage, control no longer needs enforcement. It has inertia. The cost of stepping out is now higher than the cost of staying in. And when a system reaches that point, it stops asking for compliance. It assumes it, which raises the most dangerous question of all. What happens when the system is stressed somewhere else? Here's where this stops being abstract. Because inside this system, you are not an observer. You are a variable. When energy prices move, your cost of living moves with them. When supply tightens, your margin disappears first. When stability is conditional, uncertainty becomes normal. You feel it as delays, as higher bills, as work that pays the same while costing more. And you're told this is temporary, that it's external, that it's out of your control. But this system doesn't break suddenly. It leans on households on wages, en patience. And the longer it leans, the more it asks without asking. This is the emotional trick of structural power. It never announces itself as coercion. It arrives as inevitability. If you want to understand why this matters to you, don't look at maps. Look at receipts. Look at time. Look at what you're told to absorb. Because once pressure becomes routine, it stops feeling political. And that's when it becomes permanent. Once a system like this proves it can regulate behavior quietly, it doesn't stay contained. It radiates. Other countries watch closely, not the speeches, the outcomes. They see what happens when access is conditioned. When capital pauses, when infrastructure becomes leverage, and they learn not how to resist, but how to adapt. Some move closer to secure the flow. Others hedge, building parallel systems. A few accelerate extraction before conditions tighten. None of this looks dramatic in the moment. It looks like risk management, but collectively, it changes the global map. Energy routes shift. Alliances soften. Legal norms thin. What was once an exception starts to feel like precedent. And that's the danger. Because once this model is normalized internationally, the question is no longer whether it's used, but how often, how broadly, and under what stress. And right now, stress is rising everywhere. From here, the system doesn't move in a straight line. It branches. There are three paths ahead. The first is adjustment. The system stabilizes just enough to function. Dependencies are accepted. Leverage is managed. Life continues, thinner but predictable. Nothing collapses. Nothing reforms. Pressure becomes background noise. The second path is erosion. Small failures accumulate. Maintenance lags. Trust decays quietly. Each decision makes sense on its own. Together, they hollow the system out. Resilience drops. Shock tolerance shrinks. Every disruption hits harder than the last. Then there is the third path, rupture. Not a single event, a convergence. Energy stress meets political instability. Capital hesitates at the wrong moment. The system, tuned for efficiency, loses flexibility. And when that happens, leverage stops being subtle. It becomes visible. Which path emerges isn't a matter of intention. It's a matter of timing. And timing is the one variable this system cannot fully control. There is no clean ending to this story. That's the point. Systems like this are designed to look stable right up until they aren't. They don't fail loudly. They stretch. They thin. They normalize pressure until pressure feels like air. What you've been watching is not a crisis. It's a rehearsal. A test of how much control can be exercised without visibility. How much dependency can replace consent. How far power can travel without ever announcing itself. And the most dangerous part is not what decision makers do next. It's what the rest of us stop questioning. Because once this architecture is accepted as pragmatic, it doesn't stay limited to energy, or borders, or foreign policy. It becomes the template. If you want to understand where this goes, you can't wait for collapse. You have to watch the incentives, the quiet alignments, the moments when pressure is explained as necessity. This isn't over. It's just no longer visible. If you want the next layer, where this model appears next, and what happens when it collides with something it can't price in, stay with me, because the system is already moving.